Welcome to Fraud Friday. I'm Bob Coleman, and we're talking loan fraud. Bankers, public officials, and borrowers who got caught. Lance Sexton's in the house. Hey, Lance, this podcast is geared for lenders, but also we're getting a lot of traction with other people who are just simply interested in the topic. And I thought today's case was particularly interesting for both the lenders. But let's also define some of these terms. We have a classic real estate fraud where the principals involved got loans with a number of different lenders, and a lot of these loans, they simply didn't make one payment. So I want to go through that. First of all, welcome, Lance. Glad to have your insights here. So this is what we have. We have a couple, Louis Masashi and his wife. Now, as I said, it's a tangled affair, a family affair. Louis has pled guilty. His sister-in-law has pled guilty, Christine Genren, but the wife has not. So okay. we need to be careful with that. But what the fraud is, Lance, is there were a number of properties that they put up for collateral. And you have a number of lenders involved. And I think the first thing I want to ask you, Lance, is as a lender, do you get concerned when you have a high-profile borrower? In this case, there was $19 million worth of loans that defaulted. What is your attitude when you look at a financial statement of a number of different entities? Of course, these are complicated because every property has its own LLC or entity. How do you view that as a lender, Lance?
Well, it's not necessarily a bad thing, Bob. It just means your underwriting team is going to have to spend some time vetting out all of the various entities. That's part of why SBA has rules in regards to affiliation, trying to make a determination. You've got a project and it may be a particular business or a particular piece of property that may cash flow perfectly on its own, but it has other entities that may have cash demands that would cause it not to be able to service the debt. So when you've got a borrower with multiple entities, the underwriters just have to do a good job of looking at all those various entities.
Tell me about the personal guarantee. On all of these, there were personal guarantees, but still we had a loss of $19 million. Tell me about why, first of all, why people have to offer personal guarantees and why lenders should not rely on that personal guarantee.
Well, the personal, and being a person that works in liquidation a lot, Bob.
Right.
The personal guarantee at times can be valuable in the liquidation process, but a personal guarantee, especially on an SBA loan, it's required. Is there the potential for a lot of recovery? A lot of it depends on what the financial condition of that guarantor is. You see a lot of circumstances with small business startups where you may have somebody that's starting a small business but doesn't have significant financial strength, and another guarantor is brought to the table to add that financial strength. But getting a judgment, Bob, I can offer a real simple story. I got a judgment against an individual on an SBA loan. We had liquidated all collateral. We put it to bed. We recommended charge off and wrap up. And about 4 years later, it was a additional guarantor decided he was going to sell a house. Well, guess whose judgment popped up that had to be dealt with in the process of trying to sell that house and get a new loan. My judgment did. So we were able to get some further recovery from that. So personal guarantees are important, but they're not always the cash cow that some lenders think they might be.
It goes back to a common theme. You and I are talking about characters of the first C. You want to deal with people who pay you back, then you're not going to have these issues. Christine is the sister-in-law of Louis, and she is also a CPA. So she prepared all of these financials. She was in charge of the checking account, and the issues were that we had some questions about something called a rent roll and the validity of assigning that rent roll. Walk me through that.
Well, quite often if you have a piece of property that is collateral for a loan, in this case, I think it was commercial real estate, that supposedly was being leased. And if you were going to lend money on that, you would want to get an assignment of lease. So if for whatever reason they defaulted and the building was still, you could collect those rents to help offset the debt. Assignment of leases are quite often required in SBA loans as well, especially if there's a lot of money spent on leasehold improvements. But that assignment of lease gives the bank the option to, one, in the liquidation process, Bob, if maximizing recovery is improved by continuing to have that building open operating, the bank has that option. In the case of a rental property, it gives you the opportunity to step in and collect those rents and apply those to the loan.
The reason why that's so important is in commercial real estate, the value of the property is simply the calculation of the future cash flows of the rents. This is not residential property, Lance, where we'll take a look at your house and your neighbor just sold it for X. Therefore, your house is approximately X plus or minus whatever the variation is. Commercial real estate is simply, it's all cash flow. And that's why the more rents that you're showing, the more lenders are willing to lend against that property. Absolutely. So this is all cash flow, which is, we're going to sum up on this conversation, Lance. Even though it's hard real estate, these are cash flow loans.
Absolutely, Bob. A gigantic building or a large commercial real estate building that's being leased out with no tenants has little or no value.
And that's why when you read about downtown property and pick any city you want, I think the last one I saw was San Francisco. There was a tower that has a 75% vacancy. The reason why the owners are keeping it vacant because they don't want to cut the rent. If you cut the rent, you cut the value of the building. So for lenders in the commercial real estate field, it's very difficult to determine what the value is because it's all based on cash flow. And Lance, I'm going to give you the last word. In today's economic time, calculating future cash flows on downtown property or strip mall property, any type of commercial real estate, is a interesting challenge.
It is an interesting challenge, Bob, and that's why I'm glad that I work in the SBA space where most of the commercial real estate we look at is occupied by a small business.
And by the owner.
Yeah, by the owner. Lease space is a challenge. I used to do some commercial lending on lease space, Bob, and it required me to put on I had developed a spreadsheet to help me do an internal valuation of the property outside of what the appraisers did, because I wanted to cross-check what I got from the appraisers, because sometimes I get an appraisal, Bob, and I've been educated in appraisal review, and I do some appraisal reviews at Phoenix. I wanted to be able to cross-check and see if my simple calculation of the value matched up with the appraisal, because in large commercial real estate properties, that is a lease property, Bob, the potential loss could be huge if the calculation's not correct.
And that's a great segue, Lance. Thank you for setting me up. In this case, the loss is $19 million. Thank you for joining us today for Fraud Friday, so you can stop criminals from stealing from you.